Question number 2, Dr. Ehrman, do the Gospels accurately preserve the teaching of Jesus Christ?
My own view about the sayings of Jesus is that in the New Testament there are actually things that Jesus said, of course. But there are other things in the Gospels that he did not say. I've always assumed that Craig feels the same way about this, since one of his best-known scholarly books is called Authenticating the Sayings of Jesus. It's a book that presupposes that we have to use scholarly historical criteria to establish what Jesus really said. I wasn't able to reread the book in preparation for the debate, I'm sorry to say, but I did manage to get a blurb on Amazon.com. And I assume it's accurate when it says that the purpose of Craig's book is, quote, to clarify the procedures necessary to distinguish tradition that stems from Jesus from tradition and interpretation that stem from later tradents and evangelists, end quote. Now, some of that is highfalutin scholarly language, but there's no ambiguity about what it means. Some of the sayings of Jesus in the New Testament go back to Jesus himself, and some were made up by those who told stories about Jesus, and some were made up by the gospel writers themselves. And so I think that Craig and I actually agree on this point, and if we don't, of course, we will debate it. This is very much what I myself believe. My question is the Bible then inaccurate in some of the things that it says Jesus said? If so, if it's inaccurate in some things, how do we know that it's not inaccurate in lots of things? And if it's inaccurate in lots of things, what makes us think we can trust it? As a historian, I'm absolutely certain that the Gospels contain sayings that Jesus did not say. One way to prove that is to point to the discrepancies of his sayings from one gospel to the next, which I could easily do and you can do for yourself. We could in fact spend 2 or 3 hours here while I simply list the discrepancies. But I'd like to take a different approach by dealing with just one kind of saying of Jesus in my couple minutes that remain. There is no doubt that in the Gospel of John, the 4th gospel, Jesus understands himself to be God and explicitly calls himself divine. Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father but by me. But he also says, I and the Father are one. Before Abraham was, I am. These are sayings found only in the Gospel of John. Jesus calls himself God in the Gospel of John, the latest of our Gospels, but what is striking is that he never calls himself God in Matthew, Mark, or Luke, our earliest Gospels. I don't think Jesus really said these things. And so far as I know, either does any other critical biblical scholar. I know of hundreds of biblical scholars, but I don't personally know any scholar of the Gospel of John, except for extremely conservative evangelicals or fundamentalists, who think that John accurately records all of the words of Jesus. If Craig thinks he does, if he thinks that Jesus did go around Galilee and Jerusalem calling himself God, I'd like him to explain to me on historical, not theological grounds, but historical grounds, how Jesus managed to escape getting stoned to death for blasphemy. And more important, how it is that Matthew, Mark, and Luke don't record him calling himself God. That seems like a rather important point. Did they just forget to mention that part? And why is it that whenever you read the Gospel of John, it doesn't matter what part of John you read, whether you read the words of John the Baptist, the words of Jesus, or the words of the narrator who's writing the gospel, all three sound exactly alike. How could 3 such different men sound just the same and speak the same theology? It doesn't matter what parts of John you read, it all sounds the same. Why? Because in the Gospel of John, we're not hearing 3 voices, John the Baptist, Jesus, and the narrator. We're hearing one voice, the voice of the author. The author has modified the voices of John the Baptist and Jesus to make them say what he wants them to say. This is not Jesus' voice we're hearing. It's the voice of the Gospel of John, the author. Why does this matter? Because people in our world continue to ask, is Jesus who he said he was? If you read the Gospel of John, you don't learn who Jesus said he was. You learn who John said he was.